Welcome back to the Card Pool. I'm your host, Stu.
And I'm Kyle.
And make sure your phone's on silent today because we're doing a magic moment about the stack. But importantly, Kyle's very more informed about this than I am, as you can see, because I just messed up that sentence. So, for example, we're going to have Kyle's teacher time kick it in right now. Maybe we can give that a little theme song later about like certain iterations of what's happened on with the stack. It's stuff that I misplay a lot with, or I also have no idea even how it works. So we're going to start this thing off pretty cool, and I think the priority is a good thing to start off anything that involves the stack.
Yeah. So let's start off with some general concepts before we do anything else, though. So the stack, what does it mean? So a lot of people talk about this without really understanding what it means. So what I want to get straight first is, number one, static abilities, like all creatures get +1/+1, mana abilities, meaning tap, you get mana, costs, like sacrifice a creature, do this, and then playing lands, like playing lands from your hand once per turn, like you, or more times, I suppose, those do not use the stack. They cannot be responded to in any way. So that's number one.
That's good to know.
Number two, the last thing to be cast or activated is always the first thing to resolve. The stack works backward.
I knew this one, and the best way to, if you ever get confused about it, think about it as socks and shoes. So if you are going to put your shoes on, you put your socks on, then your shoes, but you can't take your socks off first to go ahead and get your shoe off. So you have to undo your shoe and then take the sock off. So it's in a reverse order, if that makes sense.
And it's why counter spells work in the game, because if you play a spell, someone plays a counter spell to stop it, if things resolved in the order that they were cast, their spell would resolve and your counter spell wouldn't do anything.
Yeah.
So because the counter spell was last cast, it resolves first, preventing the other thing from activating.
Inherently creating a stack.
Yes, and that's where this term comes from. So anyway, you were getting to priorities. Let's start with that. This is a fairly simple concept.
So it's Kyle's teacher time with priority.
Well, thank you. I enjoy that.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is something that not everybody knows about. I'm surprised a lot of the time. So let's take a look at a Planeswalker for starters. Chandra Nalaar. This is a pretty simple one to understand here. So let's say you've got a great creature out there. You're very proud of yourself, but your opponent plays Chandra to deal with it because she has that -X, do X damage to target creature.
Oh, let's leave her up for right now.
Yeah, let's keep that up there. So your instinct, of course, would be when you see Chandra coming into play to kill your creature, your instinct, of course, is, well, I got to get rid of Chandra before she gets rid of my creature, right?
Yeah.
Right. So, however, this only works if your opponent chooses to pass priority. Players have this thing called priority, which you can, when casting a spell, maintain priority to activate one of that spell's abilities, like in Chandra here. So if your opponent casts this spell, chooses to hold priority, and then is allowed to activate Chandra's -X ability, that creature is going to die, and there is nothing you can do about it, because that is how priority works.
Okay.
However, if your opponent chooses to pass priority, which is something no good player should really ever do in this case, it's just something people do when they're not thinking, or if there's a case where they want to cast Chandra, and then they want to do something else before using her ability to kill your creature.
That doesn't involve Chandra.
Right, like casting another spell, for example. Then you can respond with, let's say, I don't know, your Cyclonic Rift, and bounce her back to the hand, and because Planeswalker abilities are at sorcery speed, they will not be able to kill your creature.
Okay.
So
that makes sense.
Yeah, it's interesting. I see a lot of people play out Planeswalkers and let other people get rid of them before they even use them. I'm like, wait a minute, you don't have to do that. So anyway, let's go on to another example. Sacred Mesa. This is an enchantment, obviously, and it has the beginning of the upkeep one. Let's not bother with that ability right now, but the activated ability here is to tap 2 mana, make a 1/1 Pegasus token, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you cast Sacred Mesa and your opponent answers with a removal spell, let's say, like, I don't know, what's something that destroys enchantments? Return to Dust. That's a good one. Let's say Return to Dust. So it's like exile target artifact or enchantment. You cast this, they do that to try and get rid of it. However, if you hold priority while you're casting Sacred Mesa, it will enter the battlefield, and you have the time to use that activated ability and pump out a couple of creature tokens before their spell takes effect and gets rid of it.
So you can do it more than once.
Exactly, because it's an activated ability. It doesn't require tapping or anything like that. It's just how much mana you have is what's important.
Okay.
So
holding priority is pretty important.
yeah, so like I said, if you don't make sure to declare that you are holding priority, they can deal with it. The only other exception to that rule is a spell with split second. Split second spells there's only a handful of them in the game, but they do not use the stack. That's the whole point of them, which is a little confusing to some people, but they can't be responded to. So if you were to cast Sacred Mesa, regardless of whether you hold priority or not, if somebody Crozen Grips you, which is a similar destruction spell with split second, you cannot activate Sacred Mesa's ability.
Yep.
So it's just going to go away.
I knew that one.
So does that kind of make sense so far?
That makes sense about the priority. The
yeah.
Planeswalker thing's usually something I always get wrong.
Right. So all right, let's go on to something a little more complicated.
Okay.
So let's talk about some cards that use phases and activate in phase.
So Kyle's teach time. Phases.
All right. Well, next let's look at a spread of cards here. So we've got Tanglewire, we've got Magus of the Tabernacle, Magus of the Tabernacle, and then Smokestack. These are all different abilities. One is attacks, one is sacrifice, one is tapping. What do all of them have in common? They all use a phase, namely the upkeep, in order to do things. I thought they were
magic cards, but I like that too.
That's true too. But those effects, when you hear something, like at the beginning of your upkeep, which pretty much all of these say because they've been errated to say so, those effects are triggered at the beginning of phases. When they do, so at the beginning of your upkeep, these abilities activate and go on the stack, just like everything else. So they go on the stack, then players have the chance to respond to them by doing things before these abilities will take effect. And this usually goes, around the table in turn order. People have the opportunity to respond. People rush through games a lot of the time, and that's why a lot of the stuff gets overlooked.
Which makes sense, especially if you're into new playing, when somebody's like, I'm going to do this and it's dead. It's like, no, I can respond.
Yeah, so players can respond to these abilities by, let's say, it's Magus of the Tabernacle, for example. You have to sack all your creatures unless you pay one for every creature. So that's when you can activate abilities like, let's say, I have a Sakura Tribe Elder out. I want to sack my Sakura Tribe Elder and search for a basic land before I have to pay for it to live.
Which makes sense.
Exactly. So Tanglewire, for example, I want to tap my creature that has an activated ability before Tanglewire forces me to tap it.
Well, also, you can inherently, I know one of these stacky kind of things with Tanglewire, if we leave it up for a second. So if you look at this, it's during the upkeep is when you're supposed to go ahead and remove the counter,
right.
But also on the upkeep is when it's supposed to go ahead and activate the effect for each fade counter on it. So inherently, when it's your turn, you can go ahead and choose to make it so that the fade counter goes away first, so this way you have a lower impact on you for the Tanglewire effect on yourself.
Or on the reverse, you could choose to leave it on and have the other ability go first if you want to do more damage to other people.
Exactly. So you can choose, that's the whole beauty of that card with the stack. You can inherently place it out how you want, not exactly how other players want to.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and Smokestack is the same way. When you have two abilities, regardless of whether it's the same card or not, that are triggering at the exact same time, you choose the order in which they activate as the player who controls them.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's great. And you'll usually see something like that also happen when you get a living death in which a whole bunch of creatures come into play. You choose which one goes first and how that's going to resolve before another one will.
Right.
And so that's a way of how this phase right now, I'm organizing it how I see fits.
Right. However, important to note once again that if you destroy one of these cards, let's say it's your upkeep, Smokestack triggers, you choose to have everyone sacrifice a bunch of creatures, then you play something to get rid of Smokestack. The fact that you got rid of the Smokestack does not negate the fact that that ability is still on the stack and is still going to happen as the status of the card was right before it died.
Yeah.
So you're still going to have to sacrifice things. The only way that would successfully work is if you got rid of it before your upkeep actually happened.
Yeah, on an opponent's turn.
Right. So there's that, and let's go on to another example of this. Let's go to combat, so to speak. We've got Narset, Enlightened Master, and Zur the Enchanter, two creatures, very powerful in Commander, that have triggered abilities when they attack.
Infamous commanders, yeah, definitely.
Yes. So cards like Narset and Zur provide possible windows of opportunity for you to deal with them, but only if you time things very precisely. For example, when you attack with Zur the Enchanter, then because his ability is, when you attack with him, you can tutor an enchantment that costs 3 or less right into play. Your opponent can't ask to see what you're going to search for before they make the choice to kill Zur. They can't say, you attack with him, and they can't say, oh, well, what are you going to look for? And if you're getting something scary out, oh, then I'm going to kill Zur. No, that's not how this works. Once the ability has started to resolve, it must continue and cannot be interrupted. The only way to deal with it successfully is to attack with Zur and then kill it when its ability goes on the stack. You will still get the ability, but there will be no more Zur. So for example, if they attacked and they're trying to put an aura on it to make it safe, then you kill it. You have to kill it when the ability goes on the stack. You can't wait to, oh, I want to see what the card is. No, that's not how this works. So, even so, you will still get a card from Zur. You didn't have to make up your mind as to what it would be before it resolved. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, so you inherently can have the advantage, and the stack plays out in your benefit.
Right, exactly. So, and the player who is attacking with Zur has the advantage in this case. Because they attack, they haven't chosen what they're going to get yet, so then you respond to whatever it is. That way, if they were originally planning on getting an aura, if you kill Zur, they're like, oh, well, I'll just search for something different,
Yeah, I can get something like Banishing Light.
Yeah, they have the advantage. So with Narset, for example, if we can bring it up again, her second ability is all one ability. So when she attacks, you exile the top 4 cards of your library until the end of the turn. You can cast non-creature cards exiled that way without paying their mana cost. It's different sentences, but it is still one block of an ability. So you can't interrupt them. So like when Narset attacks, they exile the cards, you can't say, oh my god, those cards are really good, I'm going to kill Narset so you can't cast them. No. That's not how this works. Once the ability has started activating and the cards have been revealed, the rest of the ability continues and it must resolve. So they're able to cast those cards. There's nothing you can do about it. You can get rid of Narset, but it's not going to change the fact that you can cast those cards for free.
Yeah, the only way to really get around this effect, since it's all combat-based, it has to be during the main phase before they've entered combat.
Right.
Or they have to declare that they're going into combat. It's like, all right, I have a response. I'm going to Doomblade now, or I'm going to go ahead and do some sort of instant speed spot removal, and that scenario is taken care of.
Exactly. Another way to do it is to use something like a Stifle to counter a triggered ability. That'll do it too.
That'll always work too.
Because these are triggered abilities and not activated. So that's a whole difference that maybe we'll go into in another video.
Yeah, maybe.
But
see how people think about that.
Yeah. So you with me so far?
I'm out of sleep.
All right. So let's talk about something that's really gonna blow your mind.
But before we do, if you like what we got so far, like and subscribe.
Yeah,
but either way, now on to the next one. What are we going to?
All right, well, let's look at a few cards again here. Let's look at Leonin Relic Warder, Tidehollow Sculler, and Fiend Hunter.
These all seem similar.
Again, what do these cards have in common? Well, they have in common the fact that they have 2 different abilities. They are separated by blocks of text. Fiend Hunter is the most common one you see used in this way. When Fiend Hunter enters the battlefield, you can exile another target creature. When Fiend Hunter leaves the battlefield, return the exiled card to the battlefield under its owner's control. You look at this and you think, well, it's a temporary Oblivion Ring. It's okay, but it's not great. However, what if I told you that you could get rid of the card that Fiend Hunter exiled indefinitely?
I'd say I'm sold.
I'll tell you how you can do it.
Without cheating?
Without cheating. So when Fiend Hunter enters the battlefield, the key here is that they are separate abilities. When Fiend Hunter comes into play, you have the opportunity to activate his, ETB effect, but you can choose to put that on the stack. You don't have to do it immediately. You play your Fiend Hunter. I put his targeted ability on the stack. Then, let's say you have something in play that allows you to sacrifice, like an Ashnod's Altar, for example.
Okay.
Sacrifice a creature, give you 2 mana.
An instant speed sack out.
Exactly. So, you play the Fiend Hunter, you put his first ability on the stack, but then before it resolves, you choose to sacrifice him with Ashnod's Altar. He goes to the graveyard and dies. The second ability, because he is leaving the battlefield, automatically triggers returning an exiled card to the battlefield under its owner's control. Uh-oh, there is no exiled card, so nothing happens. Fiend Hunter is dead. Then, because that whole sequence of events is over, the ability that is on the stack comes into play, exiling the card you want to exile, and because Fiend Hunter has already died, they can't get it back.
So the only caveat saving this is since the text is separated like
Yes,
that.
there are cards like Banisher Priest, for example, and Banishing Light is an enchantment that does the same thing. They have fixed this in recent days. They don't let cards do this anymore. So the way those read is like, when it comes into play, exile something until this leaves the battlefield. It is all one block of text.
Well, I don't know. I think Thought Knot Seer came later, and that definitely has a two
Yeah, but
separation.
that's interchangeable because it exiles one thing, but then it draws them a card, so it's a different card.
But you see what I'm saying? They still kept it as two separate blocks
Right,
of
but
text.
as long as it's not the same card, it's not quite the same thing.
Okay.
So yeah, and Tide Hollow Sculler is the same way, and so is Leon and Relic Warder. Using these cards and combos like this, you can permanently exile cards from a hand, permanently exile artifacts and enchantments. Like I said, they have corrected this wording in recent years so that this is no longer possible, but with the old cards like these, it is still possible.
And they still aren't oracled.
And they will not be, because people enjoy these interactions.
I think some people enjoy them, and other people despise them.
But, okay, you ready for something else? Another example here?
Of the same kind of style?
Yeah, again, I'm going to blow your mind here. So let's
All
go
right.
with two cards here. So we've got Shock, a fairly standard burn spell,
Yeah.
and Imminent Doom. So let's say your opponent has 6 life. You play Imminent Doom with 1 counter on it, so you have 2 shocks in your hand. You don't think you can win.
So this is outside of Commander.
Right. I mean, it could be in Commander, but, well, I guess not. But there are different cards that do the same thing.
But similar style, I see what
right.
you're saying.
I'm just trying to make a point here about timing, where Imminent Doom has 1 counter on it. You're thinking of it this way. I cast the Shock. Shock does 2 damage. Imminent Doom is going to put a counter on it because it's a 1-cost card. Imminent Doom is going to deal 2 damage to the person, right?
Yeah.
So you don't think with 6 life, that's 4 or 5 damage. You don't think you can win, right?
Right.
What if I told you you can?
All right. I feel like it's something with the stack,
okay,
so yeah.
Yes, it is. So what you do is, Imminent Doom is in play with 1 counter on it. You cast the first Shock, but then, before Imminent Doom has time to resolve, you immediately, in response to your first Shock, cast the second Shock.
So you would say, I cast shock,
Shock.
and on the stack, I cast Shock
Well, in responding to yourself, you cast the second Shock.
while holding
Yeah.
priority.
Well, exactly.
And then you say, then that'll resolve
Right,
with
so
Imminent
then,
Doom?
well, exactly. So you cast the first Shock, then you immediately cast the second Shock before Imminent Doom's trigger resolves or the first Shock resolves. They're all on the stack. So, because you cast both Shocks while Imminent Doom technically had 1 counter on it, Doom will trigger twice, and it will deal 2 damage instead of 1.
So you get the extra notch up.
Yep, and so it'll deal 2 damage, your 2 Shocks resolve, 2 more damage for each one, that's 6. You
So
win.
it's like a rotating door. You're pretty much just cramming another person in before that window closes.
Exactly.
Okay, I can dig it.
Exactly correct. And one more example in this vein, this is one I particularly like.
Can you please say it like Uncle from like Jackie Chan Adventures? Be like, one more thing.
Actually, yeah, it looks like, do we have that? Do we have that graphic? I'm not sure, maybe we don't, but that's okay. Let's go on to something else. I feel like I've beaten this one to death. No, all right.
No.
That's okay. That's all right. Let's go on to a different one. This is one I still like, but let's talk about how you use combos this way.
Okay.
All right, so for example, Dualcaster Mage.
Classic card. Yeah.
And Cackling Counterpart. So these 2 cards together form an infinite combo.
I'm aware of this one.
Yes, but are you aware of exactly why it works?
I'll say no for the sake of argument.
Yeah, so these form a fairly common infamous infinite combo, but you have to time it very precisely, and several conditions have to exist for this to work.
Okay.
So, for one thing, you cast Dualcaster Mage. It resolves, its ability goes on the stack. You follow this up by casting Cackling Counterpart to copy the Dualcaster Mage, assuming that you will then be able to copy something else.
Right.
You would be wrong, because you cast Cackling Counterpart second, it resolves first. So,
because you're doing the first one first. So it's 1, 2, and then it would resolve 2, 1.
Yes, so you copy the Dualcaster Mage, which enters play. Cackling Counterpart, having done its thing and resolve, goes to the graveyard. Now both Dualcaster Mages are in play with no targets to copy, unless you play something else.
Okay.
Yeah, so that doesn't work. I'll tell you what does work. So if you play Cackling Counterpart, you must have another creature on the board to target with it because it is, your own creature for this to work. So you cast Cackling Counterpart, targeting whatever creature you have on the board. Then you respond by flashing in Dualcaster Mage.
And then, because of
Exactly,
that...
because Dualcaster Mage resolves first, copying Cackling Counterpart. You can then choose to have the copy resolve first, copying your Dualcaster Mage, targeting the original counterpart, which is still on the stack, over and over and over and over and over again, as many times as you want, until you let the original counterpart resolve.
I like that.
Therefore, you have infinite Dualcaster Mages.
Yeah.
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 So there you go. If you play them in the wrong order, you miss your opportunity.
That makes sense. Because, you have to be a little bit more intuitive with it to be like, all right, this is actually how the stack works. This is actually why I should be moving it in this way. And that makes sense to me.
Yeah, and there are other cards that if you pay more mana, they can be have a little more utility than Cackling Counterpart does. But I wanted to use this as an example because it's very conditional on timing.
Okay, that's fair.
All right, so one last example. I don't want to try everyone's patience too much, but are you ready for something that's really going to make you go...
Do that again? Yeah. Oh, yeah, I'm ready for that now.
Okay, all right. Okay, one of my favorites. So let's take a look at a couple of cards here. Inala Archmage Ritualist from one of the more recent Commander products.
Okay.
And Wanderwine Prophets. These two form an extremely complex interaction that uses the stack in a lot of different ways. So Inala's job is to copy wizards that come into play, right? You make hasty token copies of wizards. That's pretty cool. Wanderwine Prophet's job is to give you extra turns. It is also a wizard.
I think I see what's going on here. It has something to do with the champion effect.
It absolutely 100% does. You are right. So, so the champion ability means when the creature comes into play, you have to sacrifice it unless you exile another creature that shares a type with it from the game.
Okay, so you have to have a merfolk into play or a wizard.
So would you buy it if I said you didn't need any other cards at all in play other than Prophets to do this?
Well, how do you even get a Prophet into play?
Well, I'll tell you. So Inala is Inala's extremely convenient because she has Eminence. You can use her ability from the command zone.
I think I just put it together.
Yeah, so what you're going to do is you have Inala in the command zone or on the battlefield, doesn't really matter which one. You cast Wanderwine Prophets. You use Inala's triggered ability to pay 1 and create a hasty token copy of Wanderwine Prophets. Because that is the last thing to happen, you can choose to have the copy's champion ability resolve first before the original one.
Okay.
You then champion the original one. The original one gets exiled because it has its own champion ability that then resolves, but since it's not in play anymore, you don't have to do anything because it can't sacrifice itself.
So I'm not seeing how the whole infinite turns happens now.
Well, I'll tell you. So you now have basically a token that has haste copy of the creature you just played.
Oh.
Again, some other conditions have to exist.
You have
to be able to attack on an empty board in some way.
Or be able to hit.
Right. So then you attack with the hasty token. Let's assume it does combat damage. Then you can use its ability to sacrifice a merfolk to take an extra turn. Sacrifice itself. The original Wanderwine Prophets now comes back into play because the champion card is no longer there. You pay 1, make a copy, exile the one all over again, wait till your next extra turn. The same thing.
That is dumb.
Over and over and over again.
So the only way this works out is pretty much if you're able to get the combat damage through.
Right. So a lot of these combos have pre-existing conditions. It is true. And maybe there are other examples I could choose from that didn't necessarily need those.
But I guess
these are some of the ones that I have experience with because I've played with in the past.
I get where you're coming from with this. It's clever. And it's one of the things it's like if you know enough of the rules pretty much, like if you've experienced this, like you've been in competitive games and where you've had to use the stack to win. And if you are creative enough or smart enough to do it, it's almost very Sherlock Holmes in a fight. It's like, all right, if I plan this the right way, I'll win.
It is. However, the two important things to note are, number one, you really need to do research. You have to know your deck to play these cards this way. You have to know your deck. You got to do research on these card interactions, really figure out how they work. Because then, number two, you have to explain it to other people and help them understand. Because there has been many a time where I've had one of these interactions occur, and other people just will not take your word for it.
Well, well, it's not only that. You have to be able to explain to them, and if they can't figure it out, you have to explain it to a judge.
Right.
And if a judge can't figure out what you're saying, either you just came up with something totally new or you're completely wrong. But most cases are not. A judge should know this because they have to go through many levels of, well, tests to go ahead and get to a certain level to be a judge. So these kind of scenarios judges go through. Actually, one of the ones that I know a judge does go through is the whole Tarmogoyf. If you try to bolt Tarmogoyf, while there's so many of certain types of cards, being that the bolt would be hitting the grave,
Right.
it's like, well, if it is at this number, would it kill it? It's like one of those kind of iterations where it's like, well, how does that interact?
Right.
So there's so many different types of ways to do it. So just having a general basis of how the stack works, it makes it so you can see what's happening. Like for me, I didn't understand the Wanderwine Prophets one. Like we didn't plan this. He just put some stuff together here, and I was like, all right, let me see if I get this. And like some of it I knew, some of it I didn't, obviously. And the Wanderwine didn't make sense to me until he walked me through it, and I was like, okay, totally makes sense. So
It's extremely janky, but it does make sense if you think about it.
it does. And that's the great thing about this. Jank sometimes is dank because it can do something.
I like that.
Jank can be dank. Maybe we'll do that as some of our stuff. It's like, is it jank or is it dank? Like, oh, that is dank.
Think about it. But I've taken up enough of your time for now with these really, really heady conversations, I think. So I think we'll call it a day.
It's Kyle's teacher time, but it's over. But we wanted to say thank you for watching us on that magic moment. Hopefully some of that stuff helped you, and if you're a newer player, this is definitely something to get your brain kind of used to, especially going into games where there's people all across the board with crazy stuff, and the way it interacts is not how you expect.
Yeah, we don't want them to be frustrated. We don't want you to be frustrated. So hopefully this has helped a little bit.
Yeah. And be sure to also let us know on any of our social media platforms. You can hit us on Reddit. You can see some of our decks on Tapped Out to see how the stack works in those scenarios. Facebook, we're always doing stuff. And Twitter, reach out to us. It's all good. And if not, email us at MTG The Card Pool. Soon we'll be getting one. It's just The Card Pool. But either way, until then, I'm Stu.
And I'm Kyle.
And we'll see you next time at the Card Pool. The stack, man.
So there's a lot to think about, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mind blown?
A little bit.
Yeah.